DAB digital radio and 1089 and 1053 AM. The Week with George Galloway on Talk Sport.
Welcome to The Week with me, George Galloway, here every Friday night between 10 and 1 o'clock in the morning. And my telephone number, as always, is 08717 223344. That's 08717 223344. Women callers are prioritised, as are first-time callers and callers who disagree with the line I'm taking on the issues we'll be discussing tonight. We want this to be the great debate. It's The Week with George Galloway, so it must be Friday. It must be Talk Sport, the Sony Academy radio station of the year.
The Week with George Galloway on Talk Sport.
And what a lineup we've got for you this evening in terms of guest, and I'm certain in terms of calls also. It certainly has been quite a week. Now, I'm the author of quite a few parliamentary zingers. I'm the author of quite a few turns of phrase that have made it somehow into the political lexicon. But I never coined a more powerful parliamentary intervention than Tom Watson, the Labour MP for West Bromwich East and memorably of the Culture, Media and Sport Committee, who has almost single-handedly in parliamentary terms, along with The Guardian in journalistic terms, forced into the open in front of the entire world the depths, the rancid, dank place that was, indeed, some of us think still is, the empire of Rupert Murdoch. When we started all this, when a police inspector came to visit me in my parliamentary office nearly 5 years ago to tell me that my mobile telephone had been hacked by a detective working for the News of the World, hardly anyone knew of the existence of this scandal. And News International, the British arm of the Murdoch Empire, doggedly defended their position from the start that this, insofar as it had ever happened, was the result of a bad apple, a rogue reporter, a right royal rogue reporter, Mr. Clive Goodman, who subsequently went to prison. No one else was involved, and nobody else knew nothing. Nobody knew that anybody was doing such things. But indefatigably, Tom Watson has pursued and pursued and pursued this issue, even though the top executives, and I mean the very top executives of News International, basically took out a contract on Tom Watson. They've admitted that they even appointed a private detective to shadow his every step at the Labour Party conference last year. And indeed, according to testimony given in the committee last week, every single member of the Culture, Media and Sport Committee that was looking into the Murdoch Empire was being dogged either by private detective or other means by that very same organisation. Now, by any stretch of the imagination, this is organised crime. And Mr. Watson this week crystallised that feeling in an absolutely remarkable parliamentary intervention when he said at the court of the Sultan, to the face of the capo, James Murdoch, he said, and I quote, "You must be the first mafia boss in history that didn't know he was running a criminal enterprise." Oh, there was a lot of clucking and tut-tutting, and oh, he went too far. But I'll tell you this, throughout the land, and throughout many other lands, people were cheering at the courage and the persistence and the parliamentary guile of this man, Tom Watson. You'll have gathered already. that he's a hero of mine, and he is our first guest on the show in just a few minutes' time. But we're also talking to another MP, a Conservative MP this time, Glyn Davis, Conservative MP for Montgomeryshire, about the proposed Welsh law planned to be in place by 2015, where people would be required to opt out of donating their organs when they die, rather than opting in by signing the register. Glyn Davis doesn't think it's a sensible thing to do, has some ethical issues with it, and doesn't believe it will increase available organs. Well, I don't myself place myself second to Glyn Davis on ethical matters, but I believe it will increase organs, and I believe that the change in the law is right. So he and I may have a good argument about that. And I may have an argument with a man that I've argued with before, Steve Moxon. He's a former Home Office whistleblower who exposed failures to apply immigration rules and wrote a book called The Great Immigration Scandal. He says that ministers have no idea how bad it is at the borders, so it's unfair to blame them. Says that Theresa May is naive, but should not be forced to resign. So a little kinder then on Tory ministers on the immigration front than he ever was on Labour ones. We'll be talking, Steve and I said talking, Steve, don't run away, about the Theresa May scandal. And we'll be talking to Stephen Booth, the research director of Open Europe, which is an independent think tank set up by some of the UK's leading business people to contribute bold new thinking to the debate about the direction of the EU. If countries cannot agree to the reforms, then the Eurozone can't continue in its current form and will have to have less members. And of course it will be catastrophic for the UK if the Eurozone collapses. At least that is the prevailing orthodoxy. I was discussing just half an hour ago with some of my closest colleagues about a book I'm planning to write quickly, which is a book which details the total collapse of what democracy there was in the European Union, when the Greek elected Prime Minister can be effectively dismissed by foreign leaders and replaced by a man who hasn't ever been elected to anything, when the Italian Prime Minister, whom I despise, but who was elected by the Italian people, can be ordered from office by foreign leaders, and again replaced by a man who's never been elected to anything, in both cases so that they can drive remorselessly down the living standards and rip asunder the social fabric of Greece and Italy, all in the interests, not as we're told by the poodle British media, of sensible budgeting, but in the interests of the banker's ramp, which is what the European Union has become. The democratic deficit in Europe has become a canyon as wide as the Grand Canyon itself. That's my point of view. Of course, I want to hear yours. And bringing up the rear in the show, if you'll forgive the phrase, is Aaron Blake. He's a political reporter at one of the world's great newspapers, the Washington Post. And we want to talk to him in particular about perhaps the greatest political gaffe in all history. The Texan governor, the rabidly right-wing Rick Perry, who started a couple of months ago as the front runner for the Republican nomination, in front of all America, and more importantly, in front of all his rivals for the job, completely dried up mid-rant in the great Republican Party debates that were taking place in the week. He failed to remember the name of the department he's been going around America threatening to abolish. Now, when I say he forgot, I mean, I don't just mean he forgot. I don't mean that he misspoke. I don't mean that he made a minor blunder. I mean that a silence so golden that it seemed to last for minutes descended upon him, which he compounded with the word oops. Oops, indeed. Rick Perry committed political suicide live on television, and I, for one, say hallelujah. The head of News International rejected claims his company operated like the mafia during the phone hacking scandal. James Murdoch made a second appearance before MPs to clarify his previous evidence. He again said he wasn't aware how widespread the practice was at the News of the World, and accused two former executives of giving misleading statements. But he became irritated by a question from the Labour MP, Tom Watson.
Mr. Murdoch, you must be the first mafia boss in history who didn't know he was running a criminal enterprise.
Mr. Watson, please. I think that's inappropriate. Mr. Chairman. Have you finished now? All right.
I think that's inappropriate, he said. A tad bristly for a man effectively being indicted before the world for being either a grotesque incompetent, an ingenue in charge of a multi-billion-pound operation with a license to print money, to run a television station in Britain, or something much, much more sinister than that. Now, there are few men who deserve the appellation Labour MP better than the said Tom Watson, and he joins me now. Tom, thanks for coming on the show.
Hi, George.
It was your finest hour, in my opinion. But just sum up for us, if you would, where you think this leaves us, because despite your best efforts, and indeed some of the other members of the committee, perhaps most of the committee, the Murdochs feel that they emerged from the whole business intact.
Well, George, he had to, in mounting his robust defence, and he'd clearly been schooled in how to not answer questions at a select committee, in my view. In mounting his defence, he threw a lot of things overboard. He basically hung responsibility for this misleading Parliament on two former executives, Tom Crone and the lawyer at News International, and the former editor of News of the World, Colin Myler. So I would imagine that they would want to respond to his allegations. And he also opened up a lot of other uncertainties. One of the things he said was he doesn't rule out closing the Sun newspaper, and he didn't deny or he didn't reject any questions about whether the Sun were involved in phone hacking as well, which I think is probably a story that may break in months to come. And he also failed to adequately answer questions about other forms of illicit surveillance like computer hacking. So what I think he did in trying to defend his personal reputation is harm the reputation of others, and also leave a lot of more questions that are going to have to be answered by this company in the next 12 months.
Indeed, and both of those men could turn out to be dangerous loose cannons now that they've been cut loose. And there is a third potential loose cannon in the picture, isn't there, whom you also spoke to in the week, the famous Neville Thurlbeck, the man who sometimes made his excuses and left, but not always, as we know, from the history of these matters, and who's, of course, suspended, I think, maybe dismissed, from the employ of the company. And you had a talk with him this week. Can you share with us what you had to say?
I met him 2 weeks ago. It was, and what he actually said was he denied quite vociferously that he was in receipt of a voicemail transcript of the so-called For Neville emails. But in so doing, and trying to justify his position to me, he said that he talked to the lawyer Tom Crone about the For Neville email, and Crone had told him that he was going to have to discuss it with James Murdoch, because the only reason they was going to settle with a man called Gordon Taylor, who runs the Professional Footballers Association, was because there was this evidence of wrongdoing. And that's the critical point. Your listeners may be wondering about the detail on this. The critical point is, was James Murdoch aware when he gave Gordon Taylor a huge astronomical sum that came with a confidentiality clause? Was he aware that a crime had been committed, and therefore was he covering up a crime? And Silbeck, in justifying his own position, in my view, led credence to Crone's argument that James Murdoch did know about this. And it was interesting that within hours of James Murdoch's testimony, Crone put out a statement to say that his evidence was disingenuous.
Yes, I mean, it's not the strongest. I mean, it's even that's even parliamentary language. We'll see if they go a bit further. There were two huge payments, of course, not just the $750,000 to settle the case of Gordon Taylor, but the reported £1 million settlement to Max Clifford. Now, Murdoch's position is that he never asked why they were paying these two men such gargantuan sums. Did that cut any ice?
No, the committee, in fact, the guy that exposed the sort of ridiculousness of that was Philip Davis, who is a political opponent of mine. He's on the right of the Tory party. He's a bluff Yorkshireman who used to work for Asda. And he basically said, are you seriously telling me you didn't ask the questions of your staff when they came to you and said, we've got to give this guy £700,000? You didn't ask what the legal opinion was. You didn't ask any more. If this was Asda and it was far less money, the chief executive officer would want to know chapter and verse on it. And I think that was perhaps the most damning part of the evidence session, because it showed that James Murdoch was failing to adequately show business leadership.
Well, surely we've now established beyond contradiction that Mr. James Murdoch is either a staggeringly incompetent chief executive, or worse, in which case, how can he go on being regarded by Ofcom as a fit and proper person to run a television station which is now a licence to print money in Britain?
Well, I'm sure that Ofcom will want to look at this, George. I mean, there is no doubt that as the chief executive of News International, he failed to ask the right questions when it came to this scandal. He's also the chairman of B-Sky B, and Ofcom have a legal responsibility to apply the fit and proper person test. He's got to show leadership of this company. He's responsible for what it does. They've got an AGM on the 29th of November where he's up for re-election. And, you know, for a lot of shareholders, that is a degree of risk affecting the company over his personal position that I'm sure they'll take into account when they come to vote in the next few weeks.
What happens next then, Tom?
Well, we've got to deliberate. My personal view is that he was so damning of Crone and Myler that the committee should probably invite them back if they want to come back and answer his statements. There is a bit of disagreement on the committee on that. I think the chairman of the committee wants to put a report out quite quickly, but I think as these matters are so serious, we need to give people the right to answer the claims. We'll report around Christmas, New Year time, and then we've still got the judge-led inquiry with Leveson and the criminal inquiries with the Met Police.
So this story will run and run.
George, well, I think we're only halfway through this. I personally think the next scandal is computer hacking, and we'll be talking about News International in 12 months and perhaps 2 years' time.
Tom Watson, thanks very much indeed. Member of the Culture, Media and Sport Committee, Labour MP for West Bromwich East, and the man who's done more than anyone else to expose before the world the rottenness at the heart of the Murdoch empire. That's at least my point of view, and his. What's yours? 08717 223344. That's 08717 223344. Also, you can text me for 50 pence, plus normal sending charges, on 81089. That's 81089, including your song suggestions that sum up this week, okay? You could also email those, or any other point of view, entirely free of charge through the website at talksport.co.uk. Here's Rob in Tooting on the Murdoch story. Rob, welcome to the show.
Good evening, George.
Hi there.
Yes, well, as far as I can make out, I mean, James Murdoch is he's either incompetent or he's complicit.
Yeah. There's no third option in this, is there?
There's no middle way there, George.
No.
Because you know what it's like running a business. You can't let 750,000 quid go.
And a million to Clifford.
And $1 million for Max Clifford. You can't let that sort of money go and not ask some questions.
No, not asked to see the council's opinion that you yourself commissioned.
Yes, I know. Not even look over the report. I think he said Queen's Counsel or something to have a look and see what the case could be. And then and that can come cheap. You do have to pay for that.
Big time.
But a lot of money. And to pay all that money and not look through it to find out why your company, or you feel the company is going to have to take net out of its profits nearly 2 million quid is incompetent.
Well, yeah. I mean, if you believe it, I hear a band playing somewhere. Believe it if you like, because I mean, he doesn't strike me as a wide-eyed ingenue. He doesn't strike me as a fool, and I just myself find it impossible to believe that his two top executives could be sitting in front of him saying, James, please give us 2 checks, one for £1 million and one for £750,000.
Oh, by two people that weren't normally allowed to pay any more than £10,000.
Exactly. That he said, okay, lads, here's the check, without asking why.
I know.
It's just beggars belief.
It's incredible. Absolutely incredible. And it'll be interesting when they do drag the other two back so that they can reiterate what they originally said. And possibly they'll put a little bit more meat on the bones, as it were.
Okay, thanks for that, Rob. Great call. 08717 223344. That's the number to call to join the great debate on the week with me, George Galloway, on Talk Sport. Millions of people across the country marked Armistice Day today. British troops in Afghanistan also held a 2-minute silence. Wreaths were laid during a ceremony at Camp Bastion. 3,500 personnel took part, along with the Defence Secretary, Philip Hammond. He says while troops are still losing their lives, today has a special significance.
It is a very, very poignant reminder that this is not just a ceremony about the past, about history. It's about what is actually happening today as our brave men and women face the threats that are out there day in, day out.
Oh dear. 08717 223344 is the number to call. 81089 is the number to text, or you can email through the website at talksport.co.uk. Now, we heard from Tom Watson, the MP, spearheading the unmasking of what he called a criminal enterprise in the Parliament in the week. And we'll be talking shortly to Steve Moxon, who exposed, he said, illegal failures to apply immigration rules, and he wrote a book about it called The Great Immigration Scandal. He, on the other hand, thinks that it's unfair to blame the Tory government ministers for what happened in what has become known as the Theresa May scandal, and that she is naive but should not be forced to resign, which gives you some indication of the way that he leans politically. At least that's how it looks to me. We'll hear from the horse's mouth very shortly. 08717 223344 if you've got a point of view on those issues. We'll later talking about Europe and about organ donation and about Rick Perry's disastrous fumble in the campaign to be the Republican nominee in the next presidential election. Meanwhile, we've got Denise in Liverpool on the subject of the Murdoch enterprise. Denise, welcome to the show.
Oh, you're welcome. James Murdoch, if you watch him, he talks to everybody as though they are objects. They are nothing to him. Whatever you say to him doesn't matter. His old man's like this as well. And he's got eyes like a doll. They don't move properly. And he dismisses. When that man, Tom Watson, said about him being a member of the mafia...
He said it was inappropriate.
It was inappropriate. It's not the sort of thing you turn around and say to somebody.
Sort of thing
it's not an answer to the question.
No.
It's so
sort of thing a computer might say.
Tom Watson
needs...
Yeah, but Tom Watson needs to speak to a psychiatrist about psychopaths because he shows every single trace, and you've got no chance with him.
Who, Tom or Murdoch?
Murdoch.
You didn't accuse him of.
Well, believe me and you, he's got every trace. So you're gonna have fun and games with this man, because he does not believe that any of you have any right to pull him or his family.
Well, he must be doing something right, because the signs are that even B-Sky-B, which is dependent on a health certificate from Ofcom, is going to stick with him as chairman, which is a terrifying risk if you ask me. But, yes, the shareholders seem to back him.
Yes, but where did Murdoch come from? He came after Robert Maxwell.
Of fond memory, yes.
Yes, so look at Robert Maxwell and his sons, and look how they did it. Well, that's what Murdoch's doing. Only he's got more government help.
Well, he's better at it.
Nothing will get rid of them. Nothing, I'm telling you now.
No, but
nothing.
He's better at it than Maxwell. Maxwell stole hundreds of millions of pounds from the pensioners in the Mirror Group because he was incompetent in business. Murdoch can certainly not be accused of being incompetent in business.
Because Murdoch watched Maxwell and how it was done.
And learned from him, yeah?
And he learnt from him. That's what all this government problem is. That's what all this money problem is. They learned from Maxwell and his sons. Now you've got Murdoch, who's got away with anything he wants because there's big bucks behind him.
Now, I'll tell you what, Denise, being up in Liverpool, you'll be interested to know that Kelvin Mackenzie pulled out of any questions on BBC Radio 4 tonight just before the show. I'll be interested to know why, and I've no doubt you in Merseyside will be interested to know why too.
Well, no. I mean, I don't know why anybody invites that sod on anything.
Well, that's a good point. Anyone who saw Question Time last night will know what has become of the concept of balance. On Question Time's panel last night, we had 2 government members of Parliament, the right-wing editor of the Jewish Chronicle, a juvenile Blairite who looked like a deer trapped in the headlights, and an unknown neuroscientist. Now that's balance. 08717 223344. That's the number to call me. You can also text me on 81089 for 50 pence plus normal sending charges. You can also write free, of course, to through the website at talksport.co.uk. Now, we need, amongst other things, suggestions for a song that sums up the week that we've been through. Here's a text. George, a Danny Alexander quote. Who he, I hear people saying all over the country. Well, only the Chief Secretary to the Treasury. Quote, the moderate unions want to reach an agreement, but there are some who seem desperate, hell-bent, if you like, on strike action. So what about the head teachers? Asks this texter. Indeed, if head teachers are no longer a moderate union, then it's hard to see who the ginger rodent Danny Alexander has in mind. I call him the ginger rodent, though I've got nothing at all against people with ginger hair. My dear producer, Laura, is a fabulous flame-haired temptress, and I've nothing even really against all rodents. But put them together, Danny Alexander, oh. Kevin in Bargoed says, George, great show. There used to be a time when ministers would resign on principle. Not anymore, it seems. Theresa May has no defence and should go now. It was a trifle unedifying how she sought to dump all the blame for this on a civil servant who was unable to respond without resigning from his position, which Brodie Clark, the official concerned, has now done. Kath in St Helens says, George, people of Merseyside are hoping that the Sun newspaper will be the next to fold. I agree that Tom Watson has been fantastic in his determination to get the truth out of the Murdochs. James Murdoch is worthy of an Oscar, however. I think that the money and power and the company they keep, i.e. Cameron and Co., will help him with his stay-out-of-jail card. It's like a new series of The Sopranos. You're right, Kath. How I miss The Sopranos. Will they ever make a new series? Will they ever? I miss Mad Men as well. Graham in London says, GG, I think James Murdoch is the mafia boss. Police, politicians and press all fear him. But not you, George. God bless you for that. Your time will come. Thanks, Graham, for that. No, I fear no one but God, and certainly not the Murdochs, and certainly not the Maxwells. In fact, I've just been writing in my book on the 1970s, which is almost finished now. I've just been writing about my war with Robert Maxwell. I think it'll be a chapter worth reading in that book. Stevie in Cliftonville in Belfast says, unelected heads of state in Greece, Italy, now at last they have something in common with Britain. Stevie, I think, means the presence of an elected head of state, in our case, the Queen. But, of course, I'm not talking about ceremonial heads of state in Greece and Italy. I'm talking about unelected prime ministers who will, without any democratic mandate at all, and in the case of Greece, with the prime minister thrown out of office because he had the temerity to offer a referendum to the people of Greece, these unelected prime ministers will be driving through remorseless, savage cuts in public expenditure. In the case of Greece, to an extent that for 50 years it may be that the Greek economy never recovers, and therefore, of course, can't pay its debts. Let's take Charlie in Rochdale on the Murdoch story. Charlie, welcome.
Cheers, George. I'd like to say, first of all, I've been quite a long-standing admirer of yours for many, many years.
Thanks, Charlie.
I thought the evidence that you gave to the Senate committee some years ago completely, utterly, not only vindicated you, but actually vindicated democracy.
Thanks, mate. It was my best day so far.
I have watched it and sent it to many people over questions of Facebook and other things for many, many years. So
thanks, Charlie.
I thought it was a very, very fine hour in terms of democracy. That actually it was put in one website which I was involved with in America for a number of years. It said, one sole solitary British MP does in 30 minutes what the whole of the Senate couldn't do in 6 years. So congratulations on that.
Thanks for that. It's on YouTube, as you say, and of course people can follow me on Facebook. The page is still called George Galloway MP because I can't get the MP removed. But 75,000 or so people are following me on that now. So it's a good way of staying in touch.
Because I think it's important because there's probably people have got memories of you for other things, which I'm not even going to get into, like on television. But I think they actually should see the way you've actually attacked the sheer fabric of what people call the judiciary, governments and so forth.
Well, when you get a chance, it's like a chance in front of goal, Charlie. If you don't shoot, you don't score, and if you keep your head, you can tuck the ball away, and people will remember it, and nobody can ever take it away from you.
Indeed, I absolutely totally take you on that. I want to come straight on to the Murdoch thing.
Yeah.
Because I wouldn't say you in particular, but for many, many years, this Murdoch empire have completely and utterly usurped everything that's decent about any people, whether it be, politicians or anyone. Everyone was fair game. And they have been for many, many years.
And not just in our country, Charlie. In Australia first.
In every country.
Australia first, then Britain, now America.
Abroad.
I mean, they've been running a campaign to destroy Obama's presidency almost from the first day that he took office on Fox News.
Yeah, well, Fox News, I think the strap line, and correct me on this, George, if I'm wrong, but I think Fox News is
fair and balanced.
Charlie,
you're right. Fox News, fair with George Galloway. David Cameron defended his Home Secretary over the border relaxation row at this week's PMQs. Theresa May has been accused by the UK's border chief, Brodie Clark, of misleading Parliament over his role in the watering down of checks. He's resigned. Mr. Cameron said the relaxation of controls Mrs. May approved was a good idea, But Mr. Clark went too far by extending that.
This was an operational decision, but one I fully back and think that she was right to take. But second, as this was unauthorised action, it is right that the head of the border force was suspended, and I back that action completely.
Well, all I can say to Mrs. May is these were precisely the hears, and exactly that volume for Dr. Liam Fox, remember him, the little pipsqueak defence secretary, just before he had to resign. I personally think she will have to resign from her position over this, not least because the Tories have painted themselves as the hammer of immigration, and yet there they were, quietly, without telling Parliament, never mind the people, what they were doing. Now I have an unfortunate announcement to make. Mr. Steve Moxon, who styles himself as the former Home Office whistleblower who exposed illegal failures to apply immigration rules and wrote the great immigration scandal, who says that it's unfair to blame the Tory ministers for what happened, and who says that Theresa May is naive but should not be forced to resign, is due to be discussing those views with me on the radio. Indeed, 5 minutes ago. But we've just spoken to him on the phone, and how shall I put this? He claims that he's enjoyed his Friday night rather too well, that he's not tired, but he is emotional, and he is, well, no longer thirsty, and doesn't feel able to come on the radio. So, Laura, let's not book him again. I mean, it's one thing, with his tawdry past, booking him for my show, but when he can't turn up because, well, he's been quenching his thirst all evening, it's really a bit hard to bear. But what that means is that others are going to have to step into the breach. So if you think Theresa May has been naive but should not be blamed, if you think it's unfair to blame the Tory ministers for the shambles that happened over the summer at our ports and airports, then you need to call me, because your champion, Steve Moxon, is unable to do so. 08717 223344, that's the number to call. 08717 223344. Do you think that this shows all the Tory hot air over terrorism and immigration was just that? Did we come to any harm by shortening the queues at the airports and the ports this week? Apparently not. Now, here's my take on it. The reason that we get queues at the airport is because half of the desks are unmanned. And half of the desks are unmanned because we don't have enough immigration officers and customs officials at our airports and posts. I've said this before, and I say it again, even at the risk of inconvenience to myself, as someone who flies in and out of the country all the time, and even sails in and out of the country some of the time on ferries to the European mainland. I have never, I think ever in my life, been stopped by a customs official. That's before I was famous, when I was really famous, and since I was really famous. I have never been stopped. Now, that means that other people, like me, might be walking through the very same customs hall, unstopped, unchecked, as me, who could be bringing in all sorts of things. And I frequently wait and curse in long, long lines to get into my own country, not because the staff are grilling potential terrorists, because, frankly, potential terrorists don't tend to come in that way, but because there's not enough staff, because the cuts in public expenditure, I mean, can you believe it? a government that is never done talking about immigration and national security, has effectively reduced the number of people controlling immigration and national security. And they did it in private, some would say in secret. There's an inquiry going on. I believe that inquiry will expose that Mr. Brodie Clark is the one telling the truth, and Mrs. Theresa May is the one who's not doing so, and her little kitten heels will shuffle off the political stage. Never has there been, and there's been a lot of competition for this post, never has there been a less distinguished holder of the august position of Secretary of State for the Home Office. That's my point of view. What's yours? 08717 223344. I'm going to add an issue here on the back of this text which I've received. Anonymous. On this day, George, how about some respect for the glorious dead of Britain and Ireland who defended and continue to defend our freedoms? It's not signed, but if it was signed, it would be signed Billy, and it would come from the environs of Glasgow Govan, no doubt. I'm going to take issue with practically every part of that very well written and grammatically correct, but politically wrong text after the news. So stand by. George, I waited in anticipation to watch and hear the great American investigative journalist and documentary maker Michael Moore on Question Time. But alas, it turned out to be an impostor. I should have known better. The panel, as usual, is 85% from the right, except what they say is only 5%. Eddie in Islington, N1, very well put. I didn't make that mistake last night, but I did make it the first time Michael Moore was on Question Time. I tuned in excitedly to see one of my heroes, but it turned out to be a zero instead. But I must say, now Question Time's been good to me. I'm on Question Time a lot, and I hope that I'll be on again. But it really was pitiful last night.
On DAB Digital Radio and 1089 and 1053 AM. The Week with George Galloway on Talk Sport.
You're listening to The Week with me, George Galloway, so it must be Friday night, and it must be Talk Sport, Sony Academy radio station of the year. My telephone number is the same as it always is, 08717 223344. If you're a woman caller, a first-time caller, or a caller who disagrees with the line I'm taking on tonight's topics for discussion, then your call will be prioritized. And of course, if you tick more than one of those boxes, well, you'll definitely get on the radio. But we want other callers too. Our legends will surely not forsake us this evening. And even those of you who call in regularly are, of course, always welcome here on The Week. 08717 223344 is the number to call. 81089 is the number to text at 50 pence plus normal sending charges, or you can write to me free through the website at talksport.co.uk.
The Week with George Galloway on Talk Sport.
Well, here's where I stand on the anonymous text from an anonymous texter whom, just for argument's sake, I shall call Billy from Govan. He said, on this day, George, how about some respect for the glorious dead of Britain and Ireland, who defended and continue to defend our freedoms? Well, I've got, as you would probably expect, quite a number of problems with that. First of all, our poor bloody infantry sent to die in the sands of Afghanistan, or Iraq before it, or Iran after it, are definitely not fighting for our freedoms. In fact, when I hear people say that our young men, whose lives were needlessly sacrificed in the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, when I hear it said that they were fighting for their country, I have to tell you the melancholy truth that they were fighting for somebody else's country. They were fighting not for their country, but for Tony Blair, who told them a pack of lies as he packed them on their way, many of them to their deaths, many more of them to the maiming and wounding of their frames. There's a front-page story on the front of the Daily Telegraph tomorrow, and I haven't seen the story yet, but the headline is this: "Wounded soldiers face the sack." That's the reality of the political leaders' contempt for these soldiers that they are forever telling us they honor. They pay our soldiers a pittance. They house the families of our soldiers in quarters you wouldn't put a zoo animal in many cases. When our soldiers come back, either physically wounded or mentally damaged, as so many of them do, then they will take their place in the greatly higher than proportionate number of ex-servicemen on the streets of our country, living homeless on the cold winter streets of our country, or worse, perhaps, behind bars, incarcerated in the prison system, where they also occupy a disproportionate number of places. Many more will live the rest of their lives, their family life and their social life, damaged by the experience of having been sent to unnecessary wars, ill-equipped, ill-armed, with the wrong uniforms, with the wrong boots, with the wrong military vehicles. And I say to you that when on Sunday you see these politicians, their faces waxed with fake grief, their poppies ever larger, worn for ever longer, they're a bunch of hypocrites. Every Wednesday afternoon, the ironclad consensus on the 3 front benches solemnly intone the name, rank, and serial number of the fallen of that week, and they promise us that they will forever remember them. But if you ask them at 3:25 to remember the name of the person they'd just been intoning their everlasting gratitude to, none of them would be able to remember the name of the soldiers concerned. They're a bunch of dirty hypocrites, and I will not wear a uniform of a red poppy like theirs. I just refuse to do so. Secondly, some of the wars that we fought in were honourable, noble wars that couldn't be avoided, that needed to be fought. One of those, most importantly, was the Second World War, which was our finest hour, and where, were it not for us, we might be conducting this radio show tonight in German. Britain might be a fascist country, ruled by fascist mobs like the EDL that were arrested, 200 of them, in Whitehall at the Cenotaph today. We might have no freedoms of any kind, and all of the world might still be under the jackboot of the Axis powers. We will, if this country lasts 10,000 more years, always be able to say that we were the people for a time alone who stood alone in defense of liberty and against fascist barbarism. And if we had capitulated, then all might have been lost. So I will always bow my head for those whose sacrifice in that Second World War saved not just our country, but saved the world from that fate. But the First World War, you see, every person who died in the First World War died in vain. It was the most absurd war in history, fought between two cousins. Indeed, if the new law on primogeniture had been in place then, the First World War would never have happened, because the leaders of Britain and Germany would have been brothers rather than cousins, and Britain and Germany would have effectively been the same country, because, of course, Queen Victoria's firstborn was a woman who was the mother of the Kaiser. Kaiser Bill and the British King were members of the same family. It was a war between a king and an emperor, for which tens of millions of people were required to give their life's blood to see who would have the bigger empire, Britain or Germany, who would run the biggest criminal enterprise abroad, Britain or Germany. And every war that we have fought since the Second World War has been an ignoble, dishonourable war that we should never have been in. So, Billy in Govan, I don't accept your premise, and I'll not stand with the hypocrites. That's where I stand. You can tell me where you do. Carl in Plasto, the legend, is the only man I could ask to follow that. Carl, welcome.
Good evening, George.
Good evening.
First of all, about democratically elected presidents or leaders of countries. Greece and Italy don't have one. Cyprus has one, but nobody ever mentions it. The democratically elected communist president of a country in the European Union. And it's almost a state secret, you know. And that woman was right. James Murdoch, a tin pot dictator who has his own secret police. You know, tabloid journalists are in effect capitalism's secret police. Now, a few weeks ago, George, I told you that I'd been arrested for wandering abroad. It was my first criminal offence.
Yes.
Well, where I was arrested was at the poppy factory in Richmond Hill. There was a little outhouse at the back where I was sleeping. And they had night watchmen and things like that in those days. You know, people had work. And he phoned the old Bill. And the old Bill apologised to me, actually, you know. But he said because it was a recorded incident and all that, they had to nick me. And they charged me under this. So that's my story. But the Garden Poppy Day, I'm an ex-serviceman who was twice on active service. I mean, I never shot MD, I got shot at, but I got a medal for being an active service, you know. And I have never in my long life now worn a poppy for the government-supported Remembrance Day. How many MPs or senators have got sons and daughters serving in Iraq or Afghanistan? Do you know that there wasn't one single Harvard man killed in Vietnam, you know? We are led by people who are prepared to kill but are not prepared to die. I stole that line from Elvis Costello, actually, you know. But and no mention is ever made at these times of the monsters who profit from war, the merchants of death, you know, represented by the American military-industrial complex, you know. What Bob Dylan magnificently called, there's a song for you tonight, the Masters of War, dare you know.
Great song, yeah.
That would be the one, you know, because the rank, stinking hypocrisy of these people who send their boys to death and then they pretend they're sorry about it. And people, what happens if you don't want to wear the bloody poppy? I'd rather, it's not red poppies we want, it's red flags, you know. We went to fight back. And people are being fools, basically, you know. They're being fooled into this mawkish sentimentality.
Well, indeed.
At the same time as they're sending boys to Afghanistan.
They're getting ready to send them to new wars.
Yeah. I've got a grandson who's in the army now, and he's going to Afghanistan, so I've got a personal concern there as well, you know.
Well, I'll tell you what, Carl. When you and I were young, the Remembrance Sunday was to remember the dead of the Great Wars. It has now become a recruiting sergeant for British militarism. It has now become a recruiting sergeant for the worst kind of chauvinistic, xenophobic, apologetic for foreign wars that should never have been fought, which have turned into bloody disasters, and nobody knows that better than the young soldiers that were sent into those wars by these lying politicians and required to give their blood. Tony Blair was ready to fight to the last drop of other people's blood. He never would have sent his own son into the front line. Italy has started the process, they say, of trying to get its finances into shape. The Senate has approved economic reforms demanded by the European Union, which now need to be passed by the lower chamber tomorrow. How's that for democracy? Prime Minister Silvio Berlusconi has promised to step down when that happens. Megan Green is a Eurozone analyst and says his resignation won't actually change that much.
The structural reforms that the government's going to have to implement will eventually help, but it will take a couple of years for them to bite and actually support growth. So I think that in terms of how the markets are going to look at Italy, it doesn't really make a big difference.
You see, the markets are now in control of the European Union, and the bankers who brought us into this pit are now being appointed as unelected prime ministers in both Greece and Italy, and who knows where after that. I mean, the lunatics are taking over the asylum. That's where I stand. Let's hear where Stephen Booth, the research director of Open Europe, stands. Stephen, welcome to the show, my friend.
Hi, how are you?
Good, and increasingly irate about the democratic deficit that always existed in the European Union's become now a canyon, isn't it?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think what you're seeing is that the Eurozone has reached its kind of its economic limits clearly, and it's also reaching its political limits. You're seeing that you've had change of government in Greece and it looks to be soon in Italy as well, under sort of considerable pressure from outside and from the European Union and from France and Germany. And what you're seeing is that no matter how much pressure is put on from outside, it's very difficult to actually get the reforms in place that everyone thinks are needed for these countries to remain in the Eurozone.
The Second World War, of course, was fought to resist the idea that Germany would dominate the European continent. That seems to have happened in peacetime.
Well, I think we're probably a long way from that, but I think what is true is that I think Germany almost reluctantly is being forced into that position because it's the only country with the money available to bail out these countries, and what you're seeing is that, I mean, understandably, if you're going to be bailing out these countries, underwriting these countries, that you want some kind of quid pro quo in terms of some kind of say in what is going on in these countries in terms of how the money is going to be spent and where the money is going to go, and sort of seeing the required reforms if you're going to stump up the cash. I think that's an understandable view, but the cost of that obviously is a democratic one, not just in the countries that are being bailed out in Italy and in Greece, but also in Germany. I mean, the German taxpayers probably aren't that happy about seeing their cash.
Oh, sure, the German taxpayers are entitled to hold their government to account for the use of their money. But the German taxpayer nor the German government are entitled to appoint the governments of other countries, or sovereignty means absolutely nothing.
No, I think you're right. I think Greece and Italy are slightly different cases. I think Berlusconi had his own domestic issues that were going to catch up with him one time or another. I think in Greece it's very clear that the outside pressure and the demands from the Eurozone have had, I mean, a very direct effect on kind of the change in government. In Italy, I think it's a slightly more nuanced picture. But I think you're right. It shows you that it's coming up. The Eurozone, the logic of the Eurozone is coming up against. There's a big democratic cost now of forcing these different countries under a single one-size-fits-all economic policy.
It's time to tear it up and start again, Stephen, isn't it?
Well, I think, again, it's one of these things where a disorderly break-up of the Eurozone is in no one's interest, especially the UK. because no one can really tell what kind of consequences that would have. But I think it's definitely time to consider the option of some countries that really can't cope economically with it, of trying to find a way of possibly slimming down the Eurozone and reorganising the membership in a way that these countries can kind of prosper outside, because it's talking about austerity. It's not a 3 or 4 year thing. It's for some of these countries, they're facing decades of austerity.
Well, they say that Greece will not recover for 50 years.
Exactly. I mean, the current plan for Greece is that in 10 years' time it will be in as good a shape as Italy is now. And if you're Greek, that wouldn't fill me with much hope, to be honest.
No, especially when the European Union had forced a banker into the Prime Minister's chair in their country, when it was the bankers not only that caused this crisis, but are the ones who are being bailed out. This is one of the great misnomers, that Greece is being bailed out. It's the banks that are being bailed out in their exposure to Greece. The money's not being given to the Greeks. It's being given to the Greek banks and the foreign banks with debts to Greece or from Greece.
Yeah, well, that's partly the problem, is that the Eurozone structure basically saw a lot of money being transferred from the northern countries to the southern countries via the banks. And if you're not going to basically write down the debt of Greece and Italy, you have to bail out the banks via the countries, which is what is kind of happening. And I think you're right about the point about the democratic point is potentially dangerous. If you're going to put in technocratic governments, the risk is that you have the entire political class pitted against the people, and that can only be a bad thing, I think. If a short-term stopgap measure, maybe it's necessary for a couple of months, but it's not a long-term sustainable solution that's going to last politically.
Stephen, thanks for that. Stephen Booth, Research Director of Open Europe. I've got so many calls now, I must take them. Tom in Liverpool, he's standing in for Steve Moxon. Go ahead, Tom. Tom, you're on the line. Tom, you're on the air. Oh, crikey, we're listening to his domestic life. Here's Mike in Fareham on the Armistice Day. Go ahead, Mike.
Hello, George.
Hi, sir.
How are you?
Very well, thanks. Enjoying the show.
I spoke to you within the last 10 years. I spoke to you on exactly the same day.
Really? 10 years ago?
Yeah, I'm a Falklands veteran.
Uh-huh.
And I was listening to your comments before the news with some other gentleman who I can't remember and don't particularly want to remember, but you think that we've all gone to war and it's all being as puppets of our government.
Well, you were ordered to go to war by your government.
Yeah, but we went there because we signed a pledge that we would go and represent our country.
But you weren't representing your country.
You weren't our people.
But you weren't. But you weren't representing.
And I tell you, 10 years ago,
but you weren't.
backed up what I said.
Mike, you weren't representing your country.
No, George.
You were sent there by Margaret Thatcher. You were sent there by Margaret Thatcher to save her political skin, and a lot of your friends had to give their skin and their blood and leave their guts on Goose Green to save Margaret Thatcher.
Eh?
That's exactly what happened.
What?
Well, let me say it again. You went there not for your country. You were sent there by Margaret Thatcher to save her political skin. Unfortunately, disastrously, tragically, a lot of your friends had to leave their skin, their blood, their guts on Goose Green in order to save the political skin of Margaret Thatcher.
You're a turncoat, actually, because you're actually, 10 years ago, you supported what I was saying and that I was going to go...
When did you speak to me 10 years ago and where?
Actually, and support...
Mike, where did you speak to me 10 years ago?
The Cenotaph, and you now.
Mike, where did you speak to me 10 years ago?
You.
Mike, can you hear me?
Well, of course I can, but
where?
Let everybody talk, not just...
Mike, where did you speak to me 10 years ago?
On this radio station, or less than 10 years.
Well, Mike, 10 years ago, I had nothing to do with this radio station. I'm not even sure if this radio station existed 10 years ago. So I'm afraid your grasp of history is somewhat, leaves something to be desired. Johnny in Chillingfold in Surrey, he wants to talk about poppies. He's coming up after this. The head of the UK border force quit his job this week, claiming Theresa May made it untenable. Brodie Clark launched a scathing attack on the Home Secretary, saying she had misled Parliament over his role in relaxing border controls. Shadow Home Secretary Yvette Cooper says we control our borders. The way we control our borders needs to modernise.
I think it was quite shocking that on Monday she couldn't tell us which airports, for example, had even been covered by her own decisions, and on Tuesday, yesterday, she couldn't tell us which airports had actually implemented the reduced checks. That is a serious problem.
Well, I got a very, very good text about this from Guy George, who says, George, no one should have resigned over the passport scandal. There is a shortage of public money, so efforts to take smart risks to save costs should be applauded, even if they occasionally get it wrong and learn from it. Last week, I drove from Calais through France to Belgium, the Netherlands and Germany, and nobody checked my passport. So if we failed to scan a few passports in Heathrow, big deal. I'd rather have more nurses and less customs officials, says Guy, rather powerfully. If you ask me. Here's Johnny in Chillingfold. I've never spoken to anyone in Chillingfold before. Johnny, you're more than welcome. Go ahead.
Hi. What a load of hypocrisy we've seen from politicians over these last few days. Poppies everywhere in the House of Commons, the whole rows of the opposition, and the Tories and the Lib Dems all wearing their poppies. I mean, it seems that the whole meaning of the poppy, because I remember when I was at school and we used to do Remembrance Day, and our teacher used to get us to, we used to read that brilliant poem from Wilfred Owen. What is it? Dulce est decorum est pro patria mori, I think was what it was called. The old lie, how great it is to die for one's country. And we're all supposed to be told that, like, we're supporting our troops by wearing these poppies and supporting the war. And I actually left a message on Facebook on my status, and one of my friends was actually a soldier that had fought in Afghanistan, and I was so annoyed with the pro-war message that's been, the whole poppy had been
hijacked. The whole thing's been hijacked.
Absolutely.
By these filthy warmongers.
That's exactly it. And I left a message on my Facebook status, and I put, sick of seeing hypocritical politicians wearing the poppy. If they really want to honour those who died in the pointless First World War and vitally necessary Second, then they will get our soldiers home from the killing fields of Afghanistan. And I thought that I might offend this guy who'd fought in Afghanistan, and his sister, liked what I'd put. You see, a lot of people in the military, I think, realise how pointless this war is.
Well, of course, and the parents of these poor young boys, the last one I looked at, I don't think it was the last one to die, but it was a week or 10 days ago, I looked at his life. He was 20 years old. He'd been 3 months in the army. He was only in the army because he couldn't get another job, because he couldn't get training or education. That's what's happening. Poor boys from the poor areas of Britain are effectively being conscripted into these wars based on a pack of lies which are doomed from the beginning, doomed in the middle, and doomed as we now near the end. It really makes me ill. Let's see if Tom in Liverpool's back, because he wants to argue that immigration levels are a disgrace. Tom, are you there?
Hi, mate, how are you?
Now, you don't sound like Tom to me.
No, I am Tom.
Are you? Go ahead, Tom.
Hi, I would like to talk about immigration.
What age are you, Tom?
I'm 15.
Excellent. Excellent, son. Go ahead.
I'd like to talk about, I think we're just not harsh enough at all on the borders.
You want to say what? Say that again.
I don't think we're harsh enough on the borders whatsoever. I mean, we're letting people in with no qualifications, I mean, if they were doctors or something like that, it'd be a different story. But they're not, they're coming in, using the resources on the NHS I don't think it's right, to the country.
But there wouldn't be an NHS if it wasn't for immigrants, Tom.
Yeah, I realise that, but there are loads of people. I mean, overpopulation is caused as a result of all of this, and I think we should just cut down on the amount of people coming in.
And you're up in Liverpool. You do know that Liverpool is a city based on immigrants, yeah? You do know that if it wasn't for the Irish and the people from the Caribbean and the people from Asia, Liverpool would scarcely exist as a city. You do know that, do you? You do know that in the 50s and the 60s, people made a mecca out of Liverpool because it was the place where you could buy American imports of black soul music before you could buy them anywhere else in Britain. Did you know that?
Yeah, I did know that, and I know that Liverpool has all the culture, with the Beatles and everything.
Exactly. Well, glory in that, my friend.
But
I mean, what sort of Britain would it be if it were not for the immigrants? Believe me, I wish I was 15, but when I was 15, there were no immigrants to speak of. And I'll tell you this, Britain's a lot better place to live in now than it was when I was 15. Much better.
Yeah, look, and I realise that, but all I'm trying to say is I think we should cut down, because I'm in London at the moment visiting my family, and to be honest, there are 7 million people in London, and there should only be about 6. I mean, it's really crowded and everything in London, and all the cities, they should just cut down on these people who are wasting...
Which people are you talking about are wasting resources?
Who come in using the NHS, and
first of all, when people come here, Tom, they work. And when they work, they pay tax, and the tax pays for the NHS. Secondly, many of the immigrants are the people who are working in the NHS. I don't know why you're so fixated, a young boy like you, about the NHS, but you're just wrong on that. Now, Tom, listen to me. Most of the immigrants coming into this country, the numbers, of course, now being well down because you'd actually need your head examined to come to Britain in its current economic, parlous state. In fact, most of the immigrants are now heading back to where they came from. But most of them, Tom, came from the European Union. And you can't stop people from the European Union living anywhere in the European Union, as 1 million people in the Algarve and another 1 million in the Costa del Sol will tell you, Tom.
Yeah, look, and I understand most of the points that you're saying, and what you said is right, they're going back, and I understand this, but like I said, there are people there who are just using the resources.
Who? How do you know that? Who? Give me some facts, give me some evidence of that.
They just are. I read the papers every day. I see
Which papers do you read, Tom? Tom, never mind taking instructions off stage. Which papers do you read, son?
Which papers? I read the Times.
Oh, I'm sorry, Tom. There's too much background, son. But first-class call, and you showed a lot of courage coming up to the plate like that. Well done, son. Here's Jonathan in Swansea on the Poppy. Go ahead, Jonathan.
Hello, George. Before I begin, a young boy said we weren't tough enough on the borders.
Yes.
What does he expect? Border police to gun down immigrants at Dover?
Yes. Yeah, I had this Gestapo image in my mind at that phrase.
I think he's been playing too much Call of Duty on his Xbox.
Well, I'll take your word for that, because I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah,
Go on, Jonathan.
First, I want you to hear this.
Is that a little light spanking between consenting adults?
What you said was one of the finest and most succinct monologues about the Poppy I've ever heard.
Thank you.
You've said what I've been thinking for the past 2 weeks.
It's been growing on me, Jonathan. I just had to let it out. I mean, it really has been growing on me.
Yeah, I don't buy a Poppy or give money to the Royal British Legion, not because I don't appreciate the sacrifices of the fighting men and women, but because last year the Royal British Legion accepted a bribe, blood money worth £15 million plus from a certain Anthony Blair.
Oh, I'd forgotten about that. Yeah, that's right.
And when they accepted that money, they disgraced and besmirched every single person who gave their lives on a battlefield. And you know why he did it, George? To boost sales of his overpriced and overrated memoirs. I can never forgive the Royal British Legion for dishonouring the memory of those who fought for this country or fought for whoever.
Well, I think that's a very powerful call, Jonathan, and I'm grateful to you for your kind words and for reminding me about the blood money of Tony Blair's book. Let me tell you what I did. I have, almost until this year, worn a poppy, though only in the last couple of days before the Remembrance Sunday. The habit of wearing an ever larger poppy for ever longer was one that always made me uncomfortable. And what I've done last year and this year is I've made the donation to the Royal British Legion, but I'm not going to wear a poppy, because to do so would make me, like these people that I'm watching on the television now, festooned in these poppies. When I reviewed the newspapers on Sky News a couple of Saturdays ago, there was a poppy laid out for me by the management at Sky News, and it caused a tremendous kerfuffle that I was not prepared to wear one. And I'm not prepared to wear one because I'm against these wars that they are glorifying. And that's what they're doing. They're using the sacrifice of our men in previous wars to boost recruitment and public support for the wars we're now in and the wars we're planning to fight. And I cannot be a part of that, Jonathan. Thanks for that great call. People like Nadine Norris think that the bigger the poppy, the more the support. I am an ex-soldier and don't wear one, says B in Aberdeen. And there's much, much more where that came from, but after these capitalist messages. Nearly 60% of people in England have little or no understanding of the new tuition fee system. Martin Lewis from MoneySavingExpert.com says that's a scandal.
Nobody has ever put any real money into going out and explaining to our youth how this system works. For 20 years we've educated them into debt and never about debt, and it is time it ended. Politicians, get your acts together.
Now, Glyn Davis is the Tory MP for Montgomeryshire. I'm just trying to work out, does that mean he's the man that beat Lembit Opic? He'll tell us, no doubt, in a minute. Glyn Davis is against the decision that Welsh law has to be adopted in 2015, whereby people would be required to opt out of donating their organs when they die rather than opting in by signing the register, which is a subject that we've discussed on here many, many times, and I've nailed my own position very firmly to the mast of an opt-out system. But Glyn's not alone, by the way, on that, because I have heard prominent churchmen in Wales also expressing their opposition to this change. I'm not entirely sure who's brought this change in, whether it's the Welsh Assembly or not, but no doubt Glyn will tell us once he's told us whether he's the man responsible for robbing the nation of Lembit Opic. Glyn, welcome to the show, my friend.
Hello, George.
Were you the man that defeated Lembit?
I'm afraid I was.
Oh, you're rotter. Anyway, you'll be back in one form or another. I have no doubt. Welcome to the show, Glyn. And I am, of course, aware of the ethical arguments around this subject, but the bottom line for me is that few of us would not want to receive a donated organ if we unexpectedly needed one.
I agree with you, George.
And therefore, it's incumbent on all of us to be ready to give our organs. Now, the evidence from the European mainland, Spain in particular, is that there's a tremendous boost to the numbers of organs available when you have the opt-out system.
Well, no, that just isn't right. I mean, I'm absolutely in favour of increasing the number of organs that are available to the nation, and it's Spain that I look at as perhaps the best evidence of all. Opt-out was introduced into Spain in 1979. Nothing changed at all until there was a comprehensive coordination system for transplant introduced 10 years later, when that's when the situation improved. The evidence tells you that the position of moving to a presumed consent position doesn't actually increase the number of organs. If it did, I mean, I do have some ethical considerations about this issue, George, but I never mentioned those. I mean, you mentioned them now, but I certainly don't. For me, it's the fact that it doesn't work. And if you look at Spain in particular, the head of the Spanish transplant service will tell you it didn't make any difference at all there.
Well, we've had evidence to the contrary. I mean, I take your point that just changing from opt-in to opt-out wouldn't do the business. But given the increased awareness in the 40 years since Spain changed its laws, or 30 years, it's likely that the numbers will increase. Certainly that's what the Welsh government presumably thinks.
It is.
And that's why they've changed the law. So tell us why they're wrong.
Well, I mean, you've got to just look at what's happened. Look at the examples. I mean, you were in Parliament probably when Gordon Brown wanted to introduce an opt-out system in England and set up a Department of Health task force who looked at it. And most people on the task force were in favour of changing when it started. But after looking at it, they produced a report that was unanimously opposed to it, because not only would it not increase the number of donors available, but that it was actually a danger that it might cause damage and decrease them. I mean, that was the conclusion of all those people. And, you know, the Spanish, it really is very, very interesting. And I spent a lot of time looking at this one. And the truth of it is the move to opt-out, it didn't, presumed consent, didn't change anything. And if you go to Spain now, there isn't actually a register in Spain. What happens in Spain is they've introduced a system where all the next of kin know what people's desires are, and then they're willing to approve a donation when they die. It's a wonderful exemplar for us here in Britain to follow, and I think in England we're following that. But in Wales they want to go down a different route. They've started a consultation on this issue over the next couple of years, and there's going to be a really interesting debate in this.
But what we've got in this, the status quo is unacceptable. People are dying every day waiting for organs which are available in pitifully small numbers compared to countries like Spain.
Well, that's all true. I think everybody involved in this debate, except those perhaps like the Archbishop of Wales, who...
I did hear his argument,
that's right, yeah. But that essentially is an ethical argument. Well, I don't think ethical arguments carry the weight of public opinion these days the way it used to perhaps 20 or 30 years ago. So for me, it's entirely an effectiveness issue. And if I can see some evidence, and there's a huge number of people who, I mean, I can't believe the response I've had since I took a public position on this. I'm not a health expert, but I've been interested in kidney dialysis in particular through knowing friends for the last sort of few years, and have a view, and I've taken an interest in what happened in Spain and to some extent in the States and other countries. The only example now, those who are wanting the change in Wales now have stopped talking about Spain. They're telling me that we can't compare it with Spain because they're culturally different and the evidence in Spain doesn't support the cause. Now they mention Belgium. Well, I haven't gone to Belgium yet, although somebody is doing some work for me now at the moment to see whether the presumed consent change has delivered it in Belgium. If somebody brings solid evidence that this change does make the sort of difference that we're talking about, then inevitably, I've got friends who've been waiting for transplants. I know exactly the pain that people go through, and one can't be unaffected by that. But there's no point in making a change unless it's going to work.
So, if it did work, if it turned out that you were wrong and that the number of organs coming available for people who need them began to rise, you'd eat the humble pie then, would you?
Absolutely. I've eaten humble pie in my life before. I think you can't go into politics unless you're willing to eat humble pie from time to time.
I'll tell you what, Glenn, it's been a pleasure disagreeing with you, and I can see how you beat that Limbat Opic. You're quite a turn. Thanks very much for coming on the show, my friend. Glyn Davis, the Tory MP for Montgomeryshire, his stand is that the Welsh Government's proposal to require people to opt out of donating their organs rather than opt in is wrong. Not ethically, as he says, though he does have some ethical problems with it, but pragmatically, he thinks that it's a mistake, which is an interesting argument, and I suppose we'll soon see whether he's right or wrong with that. Has it ever occurred to your tiny mind that Tony Blair's informers gave him lies to tell the people? As leader of the country, he had to tell the people what the intelligence told him, says an anonymous texter. Well, that's of course the opposite of the truth, as the various public inquiries have found and are finding out. Every question mark in the intelligence services reports were replaced by Mr. Blair and his Boswell, Alistair Campbell, with exclamation marks. Every maybe became a certainly. Every possibly became a definitely. Mr. Texter, it's no wonder that you didn't put your name to your text, because you're talking through a hole in your hat. 3 coins in a fountain, says Gordon in Kincardine. The very first song suggestion I've had, and I don't really like it, though I'm glad Gordon sent it, but I don't really like the song all that much. So if you want to be rescued from 3 coins in a fountain, you better get your song suggestions in quickly. George, these governments aren't kidding anyone pretending that customs are controlling our borders. People already know now that Britain's just a big toilet full of every other country's criminals from all over the world. You see, Steve, I just don't see my country as a toilet. I just don't see through that poisonous colour prism that you evidently do. I love this country. It's not a toilet. It's a beautiful place with some very, very fine people in it. Present company, Steve, accepted. 08717 223344 is the number to call. 81089 is the number to text. Free the email through their website at talksport.co.uk.
On DAB Digital Radio and 1089 and 1053 AM. The Week with George Galloway on TalkSport.
Breaking news, leaked Army memo. Army plans could make wounded soldiers redundant. Thousands of more soldiers are to be made redundant. That's by the politicians wearing those big poppies, sprouting out of their jackets like bouquets. That's what I think. What do you think? 08717 223344. We're talking about the poppies. We're talking about the Murdochs. We're talking about the Euro and the European Union. We're talking about immigration. We're talking about presumed consent in the donation of organs. And later, we'll be talking about Rick Perry, the man who went up like a rocket but came down like a stick in his performance with his Republican colleagues over the last couple of days. Well, it's the week, all right. With me, George Galloway. It must be Talk Sport.
The Week with George Galloway on Talk Sport.
Well, let me read a few of the texts. Hi, George. Good show. Agree on your speech about the poppies. Song for the end is The Final Countdown by Europe. Lol. Very good. That's a good suggestion. My dad signed up at 17. He served on the HMS Belfast and other ships and was on the Russians, of which I'm very proud. Yet they have airbrushed the Belfast out of the photos for the Olympics. How's that for thanks? Asks Sheila. Very good point. Dan in Aberystwyth says, couldn't agree more with your views on the wars. I still wear a poppy because I refuse to give up on what it used to mean, but I hate what it has become. One day out of the year, people look up and think about the same things you do every single day, although they have a very different spin on it. Keep up the good work, mate, says Dan in Aberystwyth. Thanks for that, Dan. Now, women callers are always prioritised, so it's Maureen in Westbury, who's an ex-army wife, who's written a poem on the poppy. We better hear it. Maureen, welcome to the show.
Hello.
Hi.
I wrote it last year.
Okay.
And it really did. It brings tears to my eyes to think about it. I don't know where it came from, but it was every year on the 11th day of the 11th month, at the 11th hour, we stand in front of epitaph and salute the poppy flower. Yet from that flower there is a seed, and in that seed there is a need for heroin. Ironic, indeed.
Maureen, yes, very powerful. Thanks very much for that call. Here's Janet in Falkirk, who wants to talk about the same thing, I think. Janet, welcome to the show.
Good evening, Mr. Galloway. I just want to make a comment on your opinion of politicians.
Yes.
I'm quite an elderly lady, and it took me back to my youth when I had a very old miner, farmer, grandfather, and he wouldn't let a politician of any description over his door. And he and I used to have long discussions on this. And his comment was, towards the end, I said, but they must be good, Grandpa, because they're at the top of the tree. I shan't use the dialect, Mr. Galloway, but he said, will, hen, just you remember, excrement floats.
What age are you, if you don't mind my asking, Janet?
85.
85 years young and still up listening to The Week with George Galloway on TalkSport after
yes,
midnight.
Very, very much so.
God bless you, Janet. God bless you. May you live many, many more years to follow us here on TalkSport on a Friday night. I hope I'm still here during those years. Now, Ed in Woking, he's got a point of view about the Bosnia and Kosovo conflicts. We should hear it. Ed, welcome to the show, friend.
Assalamu alaikum, George.
Alaikum salam.
How are you?
Good, thanks.
I'm also 15, by the way.
15? We've got two 15-year-olds. We just had an 85-year-old. How fantastic is that?
Brilliant,
Ed,
yeah.
welcome.
Okay, well, you said earlier you got an anonymous call from someone, and your reply to that was pretty good. You said, but the one thing I had a disagreement with, you said that every single war that British troops have been involved in or supporting
since the Second World War
was invalid or unjust.
Yeah, I said it was ignoble and wrong, yeah.
Does that include the Bosnian War where they protected...
Well, there wasn't a Bosnian war, was there?
Well, the intervention in 1995...
But there wasn't. We didn't intervene in Bosnia.
Well, I think did we not? Because I had a maths teacher from my school who was in the Royal Engineers. He was TA, I think.
The United Nations sent peacekeepers who stood by whilst Muslims were slaughtered in Bosnia.
Yeah, okay.
There was no war in Bosnia.
Okay.
No, but you're not alone in thinking that, because that's what the propaganda has tried to make you think.
Really?
There was no war in Bosnia. There was a war in Kosovo, but there was no war in Bosnia. Nobody fought.
Okay.
Nobody fought in Bosnia. The same Bosnia, by the way, which this week is going to vote against admitting Palestine into the United Nations.
Really?
Yes.
Pathetic, that is.
Bosnia has a seat on the Security Council. God knows how
George,
or
I've
why.
got some other points to ask.
Yeah, go on.
What you said about the politicians, they talk about how they stand in front of the cenotaph praying for the soldiers, but God really hasn't penetrated their hearts, has he? If you think about it, they really they don't care about the children killed in Iraq and Afghanistan.
Oh, they don't care.
They don't care about
They don't even care about the British blood that's shed.
Exactly.
You see on the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers what they really think of the soldiers.
Yeah, do you remember, they said it after the riots as well, do you remember when, about British blood, do you remember when Theresa May, they asked her about water cannons, and she goes, oh, we only use water cannons we don't use water cannons, on mainland Britain.
Yeah, only on these troublesome Irish. Ed, thanks for the call. Two 15-year-olds and an 85-year-old. It's not bad for this great University of the Airwaves that we've got. By the way, I'm speaking on Monday night in Exeter, if you're listening down that way, and I'm speaking on Tuesday night in Oxford Town Hall. I'll put up on my Facebook page the details of these meetings and how people can get into them. So that's Exeter on Monday night and Oxford Town Hall on Tuesday night. If you're in the environs and you'd like to hear me speak, please do come along. Blaine from Blantyre says, can you please explain what the poppy stands for now? Is it all wars the British have fought or all wars since 1914? Yeah, it's all wars since 1914, although the ones we fought before 1914 were even worse than the ones that we fought since. Now, let's hear from Darren in Glasgow. Go ahead, Darren.
Hi there, George.
Hi there.
How are you?
Very good. Nice to hear from you. Thanks for calling. Go ahead.
Not a problem. I'd just like to first of all say I think you're a remarkable man.
Thanks, Darren.
No problem. I totally agree with you on the refusal to wear a poppy. I think the poppy has become nothing but a fashion statement and a commercial money spinner. And what really angers me as well, something that I've faced firsthand, is the personal attacks on people that don't wear a poppy via face-to-face interaction. Or
is this even in Glasgow, Darren?
Even in Glasgow, yes. If you don't wear a poppy, you are shamed, and it's an absolute disgrace. And what really angers me as well is the politicians, the hypocrisy of the politicians that stand there, stony-faced, at 11 o'clock, standing there moaning with their poppies on, and as soon as the cameras stop rolling, the poppies are ripped off and put in the bin for another year.
Yeah, and while they're standing there, they're planning and conspiring and plotting to take us into even more wars.
Exactly, and the blood on their hands, there's so much blood on their hands, it will never be washed off.
Indeed, as the bard said, that's the bard, the English bard, of course, Darren, William Shakespeare, out damned spot, said Lady Macbeth, but all the perfumes of Arabia will not expunge this damned spot. Thanks for that call. Just as you were talking about young people joining the army, I was on a train on my way to Glasgow University on Wednesday, and I met an old high school teacher. I'm a mature student, so she was in her early 60s, and she was with her daughter. We exchanged pleasantries and asked how each other were getting on. Then they sat behind me. At the next stop, a girl of 15 came on and recognized the teacher and began to talk about her future. She really was a well-spoken girl and so respectful of the teacher that she spoke of her future. She had registered for the army, and the reason being it was better than being in Airdrie, and the army looks exciting, and there was quite an extended silence. I think my former teacher and I shared the same thought, that this young girl at such an impressionable age had been seduced by the Hollywood advert that our TV channels show as a career in the army. When she does turn 18, it frightens me to wonder what foreign country the girl will realize the horrors in this life. Keep up the good work, George. That's a great text, I must say. Unfortunately, it's also anonymous. But there's an old Billy Connolly song, and indeed there was a poster about it. Join the army, visit exotic places, meet interesting foreign people, and kill them. The doctor convicted of killing Michael Jackson has been defending his actions. Earlier this week, Conrad Murray was found guilty of involuntary manslaughter after the singer received a lethal dose of the sedative propofol. Shortly before his conviction, Murray was interviewed for Channel 4's documentary, The Man Who Killed Michael Jackson, which aired on Thursday evening. He was asked about how often he prescribed propofol.
I never recommended it. I would never have recommended propofol to Mr. Jackson.
So as a doctor, if a patient demands something but you don't recommend it, in your medical opinion is not justified, are you right to give it to him?
No.
Well, he was candid enough about that. We're waiting the sentence, of course, on that. Martin Green in Cumbrain says, I'm an ex-soldier, George. This is the first time I have not worn a poppy, and it's because of the reasons you have so eloquently stated. I agree with every word you have said about this issue. Good on you, mate. Thanks very much for that, Martin. I appreciate that. Nick in Christchurch says, George, you've no idea how glad I am to hear some common sense regarding the wearing of poppies. The hypocrisy of our politicians and the glorification of war makes me sick. Remembrance Day remembers only the soldiers and not the civilian victims of our ridiculous wars, and serves to culturally condition society to accept future invasions. We're going down the dangerous American road of having an obsession with our military and never questioning the decision to kill millions of people. That's a very powerful point indeed. Now, I did mention at the beginning of the show that Rick Perry, the one-time front-runner for the Republican nomination, probably committed political suicide in a live televised debate with his Republican challengers. Just before we talk to Aaron Blake, a political reporter with the Washington Post, let's hear how Rick Perry died on stage.
It's 3 agencies of government when I get there that are gone. Commerce, education, and the, what's the third one there? Let's see.
You need 5.
Oh, 5. Okay. So commerce, education, and the EPA? EPA. There you go. No, okay.
Let's talk deposition. Seriously? Is EPA the one you were talking about? Or?
No, sir. No, sir. We were talking about the agencies of government. EPA needs to be rebuilt. There's no doubt about that.
But you can't name the third one?
The third agency of government, yeah. I would do away with the education, the commerce, and let's see. I can't. The third one I can't. Sorry. Oops.
Well, don't laugh, because his finger might be on the trigger just a year or so from now. Although maybe Aaron Blake's got some good news for us. Hold the front page. Aaron, thanks very much for joining us, my friend.
Thanks for having me, George.
This has been quite a YouTube hit. Has it been a fatal hit for Rick Perry's campaign, do you think?
Well, we're going to find out. I think most people who know politics here think that it's either the end of his campaign or they think that it's meaning his campaign is on its last leg. I talked to one top Perry fundraiser immediately after the comment happened, before the debate was over, and he said that the debate was over, that Perry wasn't going to be able to raise money anymore. He wasn't going to be able to campaign anymore because people just aren't going to take him seriously. This is really just kind of more of the same. He's struggled in all the debates, and this was just a moment that crystallized what's been a very disappointing campaign for him.
And yet, Aaron, we did have a president who did have some connection to Texas, who made Rick Perry look like Aristotle. Perhaps we shouldn't be misunderestimating Perry's ability to bounce back. What do you think of that?
I think that I think your comment about him making George W. Bush look like Aristotle is one that a lot of people are thinking about right now. You know, that was the big question when he got in this race was, will he remind people too much of George W. Bush? I think that kind of what we've seen from him is that he's got a lot of the problems that George W. Bush had, and he's not even able to enunciate his platform as well as Bush did. And to say that George W. Bush enunciated his platform well is a little bit of a stretch by itself.
It's a bit of a stretch. So where does that leave the Republicans, Aaron? I mean, on the face of it, President Obama is quite vulnerable. The economy's on the floor. The wars are not going well. There's threats of new wars. There's an Occupy movement. There's a Tea Party movement. I mean, on the face of it, President Obama would not be in any sense guaranteed a second term. But the Republicans are struggling so much in finding someone to put up against him.
Well, there's really two things at work. I think there's that. The Republicans don't quite know what they want yet. They've got this guy named Mitt Romney who is the safe pick, who people think would match up well with Obama. But most people in the Republican Party just don't want him. They want to figure out something else. So they've gone through this succession of other candidates, from Michelle Bachmann, the congresswoman from Minnesota, to Rick Perry, and then now to Herman Cain, the businessman from Georgia.
Now he's in trouble too, isn't he?
And he's in trouble too. So every one of these candidates has had problems, and now we're moving on to Newt Gingrich, who of course has his own long history of problems, having been the Speaker of the House.
There's people hiding under tables here, Aaron, as you said that.
Well, Newt Gingrich is going to be the story next week. I want to give you guys forewarning. This is going to be the story because he's catching on in the polls. He's running
kind
as
of
a
the last man standing who isn't Mitt Romney.
Exactly. He's the last guy of substance who really hasn't fallen in this race. And I shouldn't say that. He actually has fallen. All of his staff left him, and he stopped raising money 3 months ago. But here he is again.
Yeah. Now, I mean, what about I don't know how big a question it is in the Republican Party, but he is a Mormon, Mitt Romney, and many of these fundamentalist Christian sects and groups regard Mormons more or less as heretics.
Yeah, this is a problem for a lot of Republican primary voters. Most polling on this issue shows that about 20 or 25% of the American public has some kind of a problem with voting for a Mormon. The real reason that it's a problem for Romney, though, is the voters who start this presidential nominating process are the religious conservatives in the state of Iowa who tend to be even more anti-Mormon. So that's the reason that there's been a lot of talk about whether or not he'll actually try to win Iowa or not. And if he does, it's going to be tougher because of that issue. I think that a lot of people want to downplay that because it's not politically correct, but it's really an issue that he's going to have to confront as a candidate, and his campaign knows that.
What would your money be on the final outcome? Who will Obama be facing, Aaron?
I think that the strong money is still on Mitt Romney. If you look at people who place odds on these things, Mitt Romney is still the 67-70% favorite to win this. There hasn't been one candidate who has shown the total package to beat him. Even as Newt Gingrich has caught on here, there's not really an indication that he can raise money or that he can survive the the vetting process that awaits him right now. So it's not really even that Mitt Romney is looking so strong. He is looking pretty strong, but just that there doesn't seem to be somebody that's capable of beating him right now.
But Obama beats Romney in the presidential election in terms of odds, yeah?
I'm not sure. Right now, if you look at most of the polling between Obama and Romney, it's all within the margin of error. So I think we'd be headed for a very close race.
Really. Well, that's very interesting. Aaron, you're quite a talker. I hope you'll come back on the show. Thanks very much indeed for that.
I'd be happy to, George. Thank you.
Very succinctly summing up the race of the seven dwarfs for the nomination. That was our friend from the Washington Post who helped us through that, Aaron Blake, political reporter on one of the world's greatest newspapers. Let's talk to Pal in Birmingham. Pal, welcome to the show, my friend.
Hi, thanks, George. Just want to say what some of the other callers said, that about your speech is probably the most sincerest speech from a politician I've probably heard this year.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate that.
No problem. And for a song to play out for the end of the week, I'd say War Party by Eddie Grant. That pretty much sums up the whole...
yeah, it's a good suggestion,
propaganda.
yeah.
My point on the whole remembrance thing is, if you look at all the three, the cabinet, the shadow cabinet and the Labour cabinet, how many of these politicians have relatives or people that are actually serving in the front line in any of these wars?
Oh, very few, I would think. Very, very few. I think you could count that on one hand easily.
Probably less than in America, because at least with Americans, generally they have military experience. Even if you disagree with them, they actually go out and...
Yeah, although that was a telling point Carl in Plasto made earlier when he said that not a single Harvard man lost his life in Vietnam. I haven't heard that before. It's a remarkable stat if it's accurate.
I wonder how many Oxford and Cambridge men have lost their lives in the front line in Afghanistan and in Iraq.
Mm-hmm. Well, probably more than you'd think, because one of the things which I've never seen anyone else comment on, but which I have definitely noted, is the relatively high number of officers and NCOs that have lost their lives in Afghanistan. I don't know quite why that is, but I'm certain that it's not always been the case in previous wars. Pal, thanks for the call, my friend. A very good point. Here's Damien in Liverpool, always worth hearing. Let's hear from him. Damien, welcome.
All right, George. Fantastic show, mate. Really good tonight.
It's been good tonight, thanks.
Yeah, really enjoyed it. I want to talk briefly about the poppy. You know, the poppy on TV, it's just doing my head in. You know, the celebs, pimp up my poppy, really, isn't it? On the X Factor.
Very good.
It is, though, isn't it? You got the shiny vibe, you got all that going on.
Yeah.
Did
you see hers on Question Time last night? I mean, it was like a bouquet.
Well, exactly.
That Nadine Dorries.
Yeah.
It was like a bouquet sprouting out of her ample breasts.
Absolutely. And the thing is, George, they don't even buy it. It's there for them, so they're not actually contributing. It's just a message that you want to give across that, that, I'm receptive to all that, My granddad, he was in the Liverpool Pals regiment, and he survived the Somme, and he never spoke about the horrors he saw, and he never wore a poppy, and he died in 1975. No doubt General Haig's family, they'll wear their poppy with pride.
Indeed. All these donkeys that sent these lions over the top from the trenches into the monstrous anger of the guns, Damien, cutting them down, young men in their prime, cut down, a flower of a generation that we lost. All these women that mourned them for the rest of their lives as spinsters because their love never came back. I mean, that helped to destroy our country, that First World War. Why should we be glorifying it?
Why should we indeed? And Tony Blair as well. Warmonger Tony Blair. Sending people out to Afghanistan, and that poem that lady said before about the heroin and the poppies, Afghanistan, that was one of his. I think it was the second thing he said, like the war on drugs as well will stop the heroin trade.
Yeah, and in fact, it's increased tenfold, Damien, since we got there. Thanks for the call, as always. 08717 223344. The golden coffin of Sir Jimmy Savile was on public display ahead of his funeral this week. People were invited to pay their respects. The DJ and broadcaster died on October 29th, aged 84. These people in Yorkshire say they'll miss Jimmy.
Jimmy Savile's a legend, the Yorkshire legend. I think it's lovely that people will be able to pay their last respects to him.
He was a legend in his own right. Even being able to smoke cigars on TV. His TV didn't change him at all. He was just the genuine person he was.
I just feel I've grown up with him. You know, just being part of my life, although I've never met him.
It's just a great honour to say farewell to him.
Rest in peace, Jimmy Savile. Now, let's fire through these calls. Mick in Liverpool wants to tell us why he buys a poppy. Go ahead, Mick.
Yeah, hiya, George. You all right, mate?
Very well. Thanks for ringing, son. Go ahead.
No problem. Firstly, the song to go out with for me on this day would be The Green Fields of France by The Men They Couldn't Hang.
Very, very good song.
The lyrics are perfect, aren't they?
Marvellous song, yeah.
But, you know, the reason I wear a poppy, and I'm very passionate about it, George, is two members of my family at the same time, my granddad and his wife's brother, have got big history in the First War, and these are the type of men. These were normal men, one from Yorkshire, one from Southern Ireland. They went to war. Granddad escaped 3 times, and on the 3rd occasion he had to take a German boy's life with his bare hands, and that's what he came back with, those memories. And my Uncle Martin, who's quite famous really, he won a military medal and a VC, fought right through France, buried the unnamed soldier at Westminster.
Oh, wow.
And when he was offered a bright future with the British Army, he actually refused and joined the Free State Army and worked with Michael Collins in the uprisings. He was actually injured in those, and this is the type of men I wear a poppy for. People who really just went out there and did what they were asked, but they went way above that, you know, and they did things that no person of that age should ever have to do. And young kids now should not have to be put through things like that, George.
Well said, Mick, in Liverpool. Lions led by donkeys, I'm afraid, in the First World War. Thanks very much indeed for a very powerful call. Here's Guy in Stoke-on-Trent. Always worth hearing. If I can just get that call to come up. No, I can't. Dear G, I almost got the most senior position at the RBL. You are wrong about the poppy appeal, as I was. It has nothing to do with politics. It looks after those that have served. That's it. It's a caring organisation. Your association with politics is wrong, but sadly it is inked. And by Cameron getting involved with FIFA does not help, as it strengthens the link with politics and does a disservice to those that simply followed orders. It's only for those that served. By the way, Anthony, was this not guilt money? You decide. No, you're absolutely right. I donated £100 to the Royal British Legion this year. That would have been a lot of poppies. I could have worn a bigger poppy than Nadine Dorries. I'm pretty sure she didn't pay £100 for hers. I gave the money because I want to help the work of the Royal British Legion, but I'm not going to stand with these hypocrites with one of those in my lapel. Here's a guy. Let's see if we can get him. No, we can't. Let's try again. Guy, are you there?
Hello, George.
Go ahead, Guy. You're on the air.
Yeah, hi, George. Yeah, George, I'd like to nominate a song to finish the programme with, but before I do that, maybe a better person to donate money to the British Red Cross would be the companies who deal in stocks and shares in military equipment. I've been looking on an investment.com site, and it describes as one of the companies as having exponential growth.
Wow. Well, I had an item on my television show, which I recorded today, which goes out on Sunday evening, about the profit margins during wartime in the Second World War being charged to the American government by companies providing goods and services to the U.S. military, which were 1,630% more expensive than the same goods and services supplied to the U.S. government before the war. Just goes to show that where there's blood, there's brass, Guy, yeah?
Well, there's money in war, George, isn't there?
You bet.
I'll just tell you another comment it says on this. It says that the U.S. military is a loyal and repeat customer. So I just find it absolutely...
Yeah. Emphasis on repeat. Here's Tarek in Notting Hill. It's also always worth hearing him. Tarek, go ahead.
Hello there, George.
Hi.
Well, I bought a poppy precisely because of people like, Mick and Liverpool's grandfather.
Yeah.
a very, very powerful call. But on
It was
the
a
other
very
hand,
powerful call, yeah.
I won't wear it because of all the reasons you gave in that wonderful monologue of yours earlier. You know,
Thanks,
it is
my
a
friend.
recruiting
Thanks.
tool for the increasingly militaristic culture.
Well, it's as someone put it in a text earlier, we're really now quite far down the American road of fetishizing all things military.
Yes, and taking without question everything they do, and we've seen where that led 40 years ago in Germany, or 60 years ago, whenever it was. What really got up my nose this week was the way the football match against Spain has been used, and this row about poppies on jerseys, and the sort of silly pea-brain comments made by some commentators about leaving FIFA and England not needing FIFA. In fact, it's the other way around. FIFA doesn't need England.
Indeed.
And I really hope that, you know, it reminds me a bit of this sort of mentality one had when Britain, about, you know, the European market. Britain didn't want to join at first, and when they did join, they wanted to change all the rules. It's been the same with FIFA. You know, FIFA has rules. England didn't take part in the first few World Cups because they thought they had nothing to learn by playing against foreigners.
Hungary taught them different. Tarek, thanks for that call. Sorry to cut you short, but there's a lot of people on. Colin in Glasgow is next. Colin, go ahead, friend.
How you doing, George?
Very well. Very well. Go ahead, sir.
Very similar to Mike, I believe, in Liverpool. He almost took the words out of my mouth.
He was good, yeah, he was very good.
I was going to also suggest Eric Bogle and the Green Fields of France.
Well, it's a great song, and there's been a lot of different renditions. Eric Bogle's is as good as any in the world, that's right.
I actually prefer the Furies, but that's another story.
Yes, I can tell from your accent.
Well, I'm sitting on the fence with this one because I tell you why. I'm from the Catholic community in Belfast, and there is a terrible divide with the poppy. And I'm sure you're well aware of the history.
Indeed.
And to my surprise, I'd done my family tree history very recently and found that 3 of my granduncles died in the Great War. 2 in the Somme, 1 in the Gallipoli, and
there was huge Irish sacrifice, and indeed
absolutely.
huge Indian Muslim sacrifice in the British colours in the First World War. But every drop of blood was wasted, Colin. Every death was unnecessary.
It was very unnecessary, but we also became a very politicised and contradictive population. We saw it from different angles. We saw the poppy as a Britishness, especially here in Northern Ireland, when a lot of these boys suffered and died and got butchered, and they're forgotten about.
Colin, thanks for that call. Andy's an ex-serviceman in Somerset, and he's offended by my stance on the poppy, so he's up next. Andy, welcome to the show, my friend.
Hello, George.
Yes, go ahead, sir.
I often enjoy your show.
Thanks.
I'm not offended. I am offended a bit about your poppy stance. I don't think that it's glorification of war. I think it's more a remembrance thing. As your friend was just saying, there's people that I serve with who died in Ireland. There are people that are still now who are at risk in Afghanistan and Iraq. And I just think it's a beautiful day to go out. Well, not a beautiful day. It's a remembrance day where we can go out, remember the guys that are putting their lives on the line, and whatever happens, we are going to need a military force or something to supplement what we do governmentally. I don't always agree with the government, but I do agree with the point that we have to have people there in fire, in line, that are going to take the flag.
Well, I agree with that entirely. I'm in favour of having an armed forces. Moreover, one that's well paid and well trained and well armed and well equipped and well clad and whose families live in decent houses. None of these things is true of the people wearing the big poppies at the Cenotaph tomorrow, Andy.
I appreciate that, but obviously...
Thanks for that, my friend. Got to go. Dermot is in Wood Green. Let's hear from him. Go ahead, Dermot.
Hello, George. A very good song about First World War is once again by Eric Bogle. It's Waltzing Matilda.
Ah, wonderful song.
Absolutely
wonderful song.
If possible, people out there should download the Makem and Clancy version. Tommy Makem and Liam Clancy.
Very good. My old friend Arthur Johnson on the Lagan does a great turn on that as well.
Now, very quickly, I was in America for the past 3.5 weeks for all the wrong reasons, because a brother-in-law of mine had an accident and we had to go and visit him and blah blah blah. You know, he's a bit better now, thank God. But anyway, let me give you some of the some of these cliches that are used in the radio. I just made it my business to just listen to some of the radio stations because I had a bit of time on my hands. Whatever,
yes.
Could go to hospital and coming back and blah blah blah. You know. Anyway, Rush Limbaugh, for instance. These guys are so deluded. You know, there's one particular guy, and he comes out and he says the troubles of Europe. You know, kind of, you know, with all the banking, you know, with all the crisis and all that, it's social welfare.
Ah, yes.
And then he says, then there's a grotesque one which goes as follows. It goes talking about the rich and the poor. While here in this country we would say the haves and the have-nots. The idiot guy over there says the haves and the wants.
Brilliant, damn it. Bringing us another report from the front line in the United States. Gary from Livingston says, George, how about Redemption Song by Bob Marley? Indeed, a fabulous song, but actually Ziggy Marley with the Chieftains is an even better rendition of it. Miriel of Drayton says, George, how about Sera Sera for a song to play out? Love ya. Please never leave us. Thank you so much. I have no intention of doing so. Bashir in Birmingham says, George, in the last few years we've lost Johnny Cash, Steve Jobs, Bob Hope and Jimmy Savile. So we have no cash, no jobs, no hope and nobody to fix it. That's absolutely brilliant. That's the text of the night. Well done, Bashir in Birmingham. Really excellent. Gary in Livingston in Scotland says, great show, wise words. Bob Marley's Who the Cap Fits, let them wear it. Listen to the words. I don't know that song, Gary, but thanks, I'll listen to it. Gordon in Kincardine, okay then, he says. How about Jim Garland's I Don't Want Your Millions, Mister, from the time of the Harlan County War era. Okay, Gordon, it's a better one than your first. George in Johnson says, George, my grandfather was sent to Palestine. Sent history does nothing. It does not possess immense riches, does not fight battles. It's men, real living, who all do this. His medals were never collected or worn. Song for tonight, Carl's suggestion, or Living with War by Neil Young. Yes, a very good song. Now, I've already read Meriel's suggestion. Asgar in Ilford says, only one song, War Pigs by Black Sabbath. Any comment on remarks by Sarkozy and Obama about the mass murderer and liar Netanyahu? Yes. If Sarkozy and Obama agree with the rest of us about Netanyahu, how come they continue to bend the world in Israel's interests? I only ask. NASA says its latest mission to Mars will begin in 2 weeks. Scientists say it's not designed to look for signs of life, and the $2.5 billion rover will not be carrying life-detecting equipment. Instead, it will try to assess if the red planet has environments which could be habitable. Ashwin Vasavada is the deputy project scientist at the Mars Science Laboratory.
It's important to know that this mission is really has a purpose of setting us up for the day when we'll go to Mars and do the life detection experiment. It turns out those are pretty hard to do, and you actually need to know a lot about Mars to understand where to go to do those experiments.
Now, Karen in Warminster says, George, hearing what you said earlier, another song suggestion is The Lunatics Have Taken Over the Asylum by Funboy 3. Excellent. Dinah in West London says, I agree with you, George. I cannot bring myself to put on a poppy this year. Too much pressure to conform to support their wars. Dinah, that's my feeling entirely, you know. And I never used to be like this. It's just this year, and I think last year, I just can't take it anymore. Here's the legendary Fred, the wisest cabbie in all Christendom. He's in central London, no doubt, in his cab. Fred, welcome back.
Hello, mate.
Hi, go ahead, sir.
Yeah, don't forget Bloody Nicholas, of course. He was another one of Victoria's grandchildren.
Yes, that's right.
You know, it was a family feud, wasn't it, as we know. Do you know, when you talk about lions and donkeys, you get places like, you know, Verdun, Passchendaele, Vimy Ridge, Gallipoli, the Somme, Flanders. It epitomises that whole bloody system, you know, of elitism where our kids were sort of sent to give their lives for what was a non-cause. But the greatest irony of all, George, is when you look at Afghanistan and Iraq and all the other wars, especially World War I, that we've taken part in, the great irony is the one that we should have been involved in earlier without hesitation, even during the Spanish Civil War, of course, World War II, when, you know, people like Stalin and Churchill became comrades. you know, it gives you some idea of how evil that was, and it had to be stopped at all costs.
If we'd stopped fascism in Spain in 1936, there wouldn't have been a Second World War.
Well, there were numerous occasions when it could have been stopped.
Indeed, if we'd stopped Hitler at Czechoslovakia, there might not have been a Poland, and there might not have been everything that followed.
Well, that's absolutely right, and we shouldn't have, of course, forget that one of our greatest allies was Russia. You know, with the 25 million people that died, fighting fascism, they don't really get much recognition, and I think they should.
Absolutely right. Great call, as always, from Fred the Cabbie. Here's another legend, Tommy in Glasgow. Go on yourself, Tommy.
Assalamu alaikum, brother.
Alaikum salam, go on.
Well, before I make my point, the tune I would play it if I was you is a Soldier song from the Irish Boys, you know, and instead of pledging our lives to Ireland, we pledge our lives to Palestine, that they might be free from the Zionist tyranny. But let's look at the timeline, you know, for what happened in Greece. Now, Mr. Papandreou was given the severest package of measures to be implemented, and he knew this spelt his own doom. So he tried to turn it around, and the only game he could play was say, it's a referendum time in Greece. So with that, well, that was blackballed immediately. Sarkozy and Merkel stood up in an astonishing attack that I've never seen before, declared democracy, you can just rip it to pieces when it comes to saving the EU. I couldn't believe it when I heard it last week. And so this is the timeline. So they said to him, take this package. He says, well, let's have a referendum. They hit back and says, look, there is no democracy. Within one day, the deal for the referendum was taken off the table. Within the next day, there was a government in Greece that wasn't elected by its people. They're calling it a technocratic government. And then within another couple of days, we've got another technocratic government, another government in the EU which is now being run by people who were not elected. So,
by the way, they're both bankers, Tommy.
And yes, well, this is the resorting to type, because now the fraud has been exposed. Because when they went to the G20, to the BRIC countries, to Japan, to China, they laughed. They laughed at the Bundesbank and the EU and said, you have got more than enough equity, more than enough money to back this and bail it out. So what they're using, this is a slave tool mechanism.
Good. Excellent, Tommy. I'd let you on longer, but we're running out of time fast, and I've got to get a few more calls in. Here's another legend, David in Essex. David, go ahead, sir.
Yeah, hiya, George.
Hi.
Over the years, I've marched against war and for peace, and I've laid down outside the American embassy at the time of the Vietnam War, and I fully accept what you say about the politicians, but I can't bring myself as yet to abandon the poppy, because I remember my mother telling me that when she was a kid at the end of the 14-18 war, there were limbless soldiers out in the street in all weathers selling, matches and shoelaces and all this sort of thing, and that's the reason why the British Legion was formed 90 years ago. And
no, I absolutely respect that point of view, David, and indeed it was my own point of view until very recently. Last call, I think, I'm sorry for those who didn't get on, is from Sean in Dallas. If I can get him up. Sean in Dallas. Oh dear, I've got difficulties. Self-Preservation Society, Italian job. Says Will in Williston. That's another good suggestion. George, my song for the week has to be The Farms Altogether Now. Louis for Liverpool. It's a very, very good song, that, Altogether Now, I must say. Unfortunately, I've finally got him. Sean in Dallas, welcome, sir.
Hello, George. It's been a long time. Too long, my friend.
Indeed. And I just had to take a Texan caller, as I've been traducing the great state of Texas, at least by association, with Rick Perry and George W. Bush. So I thought we'd get somebody with brains from Dallas. Go ahead, Sean.
Well, first of all, the governorship of Texas is more of a figurehead position than anything else, but that has to do with the internal workings of Texas. And if you ever read the Texas Constitution, if you have the masochistic urge to go through all the grammatical errors, you'll see that. But ultimately, why I'm calling you is because the United States government is engaged in the single most expensive expensive acquisition of military technology in the history of the world, from what I can tell. It's called the F-35 Joint Strike Fighter. The primary contractor is Lockheed Martin. According to a recent selected weapons acquisition report issued to Congress by that liberal pinko organization, I believe the Pentagon, in April 2011, it's going to cost, the life cycle and operating cost for 2,456 of them is going to be $1 trillion, and add to that $382 billion it costs to acquire them. That makes your per unit cost well over $562 million per plane. I want to remind you something, George. Britain is a level 1 partner in this operation. You're slated to purchase, I believe, 138 of them.
Oh, thanks very much. My eyes are watering, Sean. My eyes are watering already. I'm sorry to cut you short, my dear, all the way from Texas, but we've got to hear from the man who's going to accompany you through the early hours. It's Thinking Man and Woman's Radio. It's Matt Ford.
Good evening, George.
Good evening.
Are you well?
Yes, indeed. You?
Yes, very well, thanks. It's a cracking week for Talking Points, isn't it?
It is. No
this
shortage,
weekend.
yeah.
As well as poppies, we're discussing some of that and blinged up poppies. The EDL, 179 of them were arrested today in the Red Lion pub on Whitehall, a pub I'm sure you're familiar with, just round the corner from Parliament. Now, the Muslims Against Crusades were banned this week, and there were raids across East London to prevent them making a mockery at the cenotaph yesterday. I just wonder whether it's got to the point now with the EDL. They're not doing anything constructive for British society. They seem hell-bent on stirring racial hatred. Whether we should actually go that extra step and just absolutely ban them.
I think they're headed in that direction.
I mean, I
think the police have had enough of them.
I can't believe it.
Tell you that for sure.
It was good to see it properly policed today, because too often you've seen these EDL demonstrations in Dudley, in various parts of the country, in Nottingham as well, where they've got hundreds of them and very few police to deal with this sort of marauding mob of half-wits. Thank God yesterday in London there were enough police to deal with it. Also talking about Scottish comedian Brian Limond, known better as Limming. He caused a Twitter storm this week where he said, if I was to find out right now that Thatcher had died, I don't think my heart could take it. Jackpot. He also tweeted a picture of Margaret Thatcher with her eyes gouged out with the words "die now" across her forehead. Now, there are plenty of people, I'm sure you know some, George, I know I do, that openly say, well, when Thatcher's gone, I'll have a party. But how acceptable actually is it to wish someone dead?
No, it's not acceptable.
And I think some people
at
have
least not in my religion.
No, and so I think some people have reinvented. I mean, I'm no fan of Margaret Thatcher, but reinvented just how bad she was at times.
Well, I don't know about that. But I don't think it follows that you're entitled to wish someone dead. You'll like this one. This is our only hope, actually. Ziggy Marley with the Chieftains, the great Bob Marley song.